Welcome to the history of nursing. The history of how we cared for our sick and vulnerable is also the history of our politics, sociology and our religious beliefs. This series will try and explain the evolution of nursing practice and, most importantly, will try and answer the bigger question. Why are we striking and how did things get so bad? Let's charge up our time machine and go back to... Even though most of what we know about nomadic medicine comes from archaeological findings, we do know that early humans had a basic understanding of anatomy and physiology. One notable example is trepanning, a process where a hole is drilled into the skull. This is used in modern day medicine to relieve pressure built up inside the skull, usually by internal hemorrhaging. Some hypothesize that the practice was used back then to let out evil spirits. People would have symptoms like horrifically painful headaches or seizures, and back then this might have been interpreted as the person being possessed. Ironically, the procedure worked on occasion, as these are classic symptoms of ICP buildup or intracranial pressure. It goes without saying that life was hard back then. The average life expectancy was roughly 20 to 30 years for prehistoric people. On that note, let's move on to something a little less morbid. Let's jump through time and travel to the Roman Empire. It goes without saying that modern Western nursing has its roots in Christianity. Even though today nursing is not a religious practice, the words like sister, a nurse in charge of a ward, has its origins in Christianity. Saint Helena, known as the mother of Christianity, is credited for establishing the first home for the infirmed. Before her passing, she played a vital role with her son Constantine, bringing Christianity to the whole Roman Empire. These homes for the infirmed were basically places for people to die in, tended on by monks. Hospitals back then were not places for people to get better in. However, a couple of hundred years later, the first officially documented hospital that set out to actively treat people was in 805 AD in Baghdad, which also served as a medical school. You may ask, why is this relevant to nursing? Well, the average nurse back in Roman times were wealthy women who dedicated their lives to caring for the sick and the infirmed. They didn't require a salary because they were born into wealth and had the privileged existence to fully commit to their religious calling. I can't count how many times I still hear that nursing is a calling in response to any debate about a pay rise in nursing. Unfortunately, a life of servitude and modern day nursing can be linked directly back to the practices of these Roman women. After the fall of the Roman Empire, like in all recorded history, things become a little sketchier. We now move on to... After the fall of the Roman Empire in roughly 410 AD, things in the United Kingdom started to unravel. And when I say unravel, I mean the whole country decided to go centuries back in time in terms of living conditions and sanitation. All the sewage systems were abandoned, and any knowledge of medicine and healthcare left along with the Romans. The reason why this period in time was called the Dark Ages was because there was very little documentation on actually what happened. From the little evidence that we have, we know that any practice of non-religious care went out of the window. Care for the ill and infirmed was kept to the monasteries, monks and nuns. Throughout this time, there was a constant back and forth between secular medicine and spiritual healing. The Gregorian Reformation stated that the writings of Hippocrates and Galen were examples of paganism and shouldn't be followed. Also, Pope Innocent III stated that all clergymen should not perform surgery. So surgery was left to members of the public who had no knowledge or training. It wasn't until the Renaissance when scientific discovery finally took off, and that was in the 1400s. My advice is, if you have a time machine of your own, don't come back here. Let's move on. We're going to fly through history now, so I'm going to gloss over the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, the Renaissance period, the dissolution of the monasteries as Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church, and then we'll add a couple of hundred years to that, which leads us to... It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that everything had gone belly up in this period. Whilst Edward Jenner had discovered the process of inoculation by using cowpox to vaccinate children from smallpox, in terms of advancement there is still a lot to be done. The difference between the start of the 1800s and the end is staggering. By the end of the 1800s, Florence Nightingale had established her own nursing education program, which brought a lot of modern nursing practice that we see today. But we have to start somewhere. In the 1800s, hospitals were germ-infested cesspools. People died on a regular basis from infections or shock. No one went to the doctor because they were too expensive, and also they had no idea about how the human body actually worked. Antibiotics and anesthetics did not exist. The working conditions for most were dire, and there was no legal protection for children who were working also. So what were nurses like in this time? They were very different to what we think of nurses now. The nursing profession was not respected at all. Most nurses had fallen into the profession because they couldn't do anything else. They were ex-servants, fallen women, poor widows, or those who had run away from marriage. They also didn't do any clinical tasks. They cleaned, did the dishes, fed patients, and cleared the plates away. In my opinion, this attitude towards care work has continued up to the present day. Some people still believe that intimate care is beneath them and shouldn't be done by people who have the same economic status as them. In the United Kingdom, cleaning and feeding a fellow human is still regarded, by some, as a lower ability profession. Even though nursing in the present day demands a high understanding of anatomy and physiology, alongside pharmacology, psychology, and a couple more ologies after that. Even though working conditions for nurses in this time were awful, there were a few medical and social advances that happened. Some of the most notable are the Public Health Act 1848, the Vaccination Act 1853, John Snow invents epidemiology, the first Gray's Anatomy is published. In 1858, Elizabeth Blackwell became the first female doctor. Louis Pasteur invents germ theory that advances the way we view infectious diseases. This ends the first part of the series. In the next part, we'll start off with Florence Nightingale and carry on to the present day. In the words of D-Rim, things can only get better.